I'm very excited to welcome 2017's visiting author Candace Fleming. I'd like to give a very warm thank you to our Iowa City Community School Foundation, as well as Hills Bank for sponsoring this yearly event. Welcome, Candace. We're very happy to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here.
So I saw your presentation earlier this week at Lemmy Elementary,
I did.
where you talked about a writer's most important tools being their ears and their eyes. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. It's what I tell kids, but it's the truth. Writers, first and foremost, they go out to the world and they pay attention to everything going on around them. So they note those details, they look closely, they listen closely, they note, like I tell kids, all the details. So they notice how things sound and how they smell and how they taste. But I think most importantly, you notice how things make you feel. So if you see something that makes you laugh, you know that's something you can explore in your writing. Or if you see something that makes you sad or angry, perfect place to explore it in your writing. Curiosity, perfect place to explore it in your writing. So kids often tell me they don't have any ideas, right? And I don't think they quite make that connection between ideas for your own work come from your own life. So.
Love that. I love that you call them story seeds.
Yeah, they are story seeds because it's not the whole thing, right? So, it's particularly if I'm going to write fiction or they're going to write fiction, they're not going to write what really happened. Today I was with a group and they were talking about, oh gosh, one story seed that this boy had told this funny joke and how we wouldn't make that into just exactly Jared tells a funny joke, but instead Jared would be a panda bear who told that funny joke. So they totally got it suddenly, and they turned him into a bear, which I thought was pretty great.
That's great. So I heard you talk about how you've always been a storyteller. When in your life and how did you decide that you wanted to tell stories for children?
I came to writing for children. I came to that a little late. I've always been a writer, so it's something I've always done. And, I guess you obviously learned I've always been a storyteller. So even before I was writing stories, I was telling stories. But I thought of myself as a writer, but I never thought of myself as a person that would make my living writing. And it wasn't until my son Michael was born, and he was born with a heart defect, and he couldn't go to daycare, so he had to stay home. So I quit the job that I was working at and stayed home. And I loved being home with him, but it was at times a little bit boring, right? There was nothing for me. So I thought to myself, what can I do? What can I do in the cracks between mothering? And then I thought, well, I write, and I've always written. So I started out writing for adults because that was the automatic audience I thought of. I wrote things for like Parenting Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, Chicago Tribune Magazine when they actually still had one, the Sunday supplement. I was pretty much writing my life. I did a lot of articles like 7 nap time strategies. That's scintillating, isn't it?
Early mom blogging.
Oh, early mom writing, exactly. And then I wrote a little piece about a cheese that Thomas Jefferson had gotten, a story that I knew. And I got done with it, and I thought, wow, I don't think this is a adult's piece. I think this is a children's piece. Not that I knew much about that. I sent it to the only magazine I knew for children, which was Highlights for Children. And they bought it. But then the best thing they did was the editor called and said, do you write for children? And I said, no, I don't. But I'd had such a good time doing that article. I decided I would do some more. And that's how I really got started. So I really sort of cut my teeth on it, writing history, writing nonfiction for magazines, and sort of backed into the rest of it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So you write for older children, teens, and you also write picture books. How do you decide which story seeds you're going to use for which audience? Does that change?
I think they change. I think a lot of times, at least I do, I see or hear something, or something strikes me as a really great idea. Automatically, I seem to know if that's a perfect idea for a 3-year-old or if it's more of a perfect idea for a high schooler. I love the fact that I write everything from preschool up to high school, and occasionally still for adults. Occasionally I write for the New York Times. But I think that I really like the challenge of writing for all of it, but I also like the variety a lot. I think I would get really stale if I just wrote picture books. So.
I see that, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself having a hard time striking the balance between working on books for younger readers and older readers? I heard you say that you have like 3 or 4 things in the works.
I do. I have 3 or 4 things at the works at one time. I have like 3 or 4 things coming next year. I don't know if it's necessarily something I strike a balance at, although I will say that naturally I think I'm inclined to do it. For example, I was writing a book, a YA, it was nonfiction, called The Family Romanoff. And I was in that book for about 5 years with between the research and the writing and the rewriting and then just the back matter sources. And I got to this place where I can remember saying to my partner, saying to him, I am never going to get out of this book. I'm never going to get out of this book. And all I really want right now is to write preschool, something preschool. And I think it's a good inclination. So I did. And I wrote about a dump truck. Or no, a bulldozer, I'm sorry. I wrote about a bulldozer. And so people would say, so what's your follow-up to The Family Romanoff, you know? And I'd go, my follow-up is Bulldozer's Big Day. And, you know, it seemed like a really odd thing, you know? Here's your big YA piece of serious nonfiction, and then here's this preschool book. Oftentimes people are surprised it's the same author. I just go, well, I have a lot of interests. And I think I need that. I'm not so sure if it's a balance, but I definitely need that variety. I need that escape. And oftentimes I will, I'll say, you know, someone will say, what's your favorite thing to write? What's your favorite genre? And I think to myself, whatever it is I'm not working in right now, but the grass is always greener, yeah. No more novels, I need to write a picture book. No more picture books, I need a piece of nonfiction. Yeah, so.
So we love Bulldozer's Big Day at our house.
Oh, good.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, you must have little ones.
I do, yeah. I have a 2-year-old. She'll be 2 very soon. And bulldozers are, construction vehicles in general are very large.
Yes, they are very big.
The part that she seems to enjoy the most is that rhythmic language that you use, the onomatopoeia. And I found that in a lot of your picture books, you use a lot of that, like muncha, 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 and oh no. Do you find yourself having... How do you go about like finding the right timing to incorporate that into a story? As someone who reads books out loud, I find that kids tend to repeat that with me, especially in Muncha, Muncha, Muncha.
And I think that's something I really strive for. One, the fact that picture books I know are going to be read out loud, and I expect that they will be read out loud. So I'm always striving for that musicality in the language and those repeating lines that they can repeat, they can grab onto and become part of the story. I think is really important for picture books, particularly picture books for preschoolers, kindergartners. How I do that, I'm not really sure, except that those are the books that take me seriously 10, 15 drafts. You write it again, and then I write it again, and then I read it out loud, and then I write it again, and I read it out loud, and I write it again. And then I get to that point where I'm like draft 10, where I put in and take out and put in and it really is about that beat, you know, how it sounds, the measured language when you read it out loud. How does it sound with that page turn? Because that always adds an extra sound, an extra beat. Even the sound of the pages. One of the things I love most about read-alouds, right? Read-aloud picture books is that turn. You can actually hear it becomes part of the language. And then he said, shh, you know, and then you go on. It's spectacular. But for me, it's merely a matter of doing it again and again and again and listening really closely.
So you were just talking about your writing process for picture books. Do you find that your writing process for picture books and older readers is really different, or is it much the same? You know, the older, I would tell you that I think writing a middle grade novel is easier for me than writing a picture book, only because I get all those extra words. Right. And I don't have to worry about that 32-page form, which is a unique form. With the picture book, you're writing within a fence, right? There's that fence, and there's not much you can do to break out of that, except there is, if you're clever enough and you find new and challenging ways, which is what I think I love most about the picture book, that you can be wildly creative, but you still have to stay within this fence. The book is what it is. And so that's the book that I will write 10 times, 15 times, and read aloud again and again and again for every sound that every syllable makes. Novels, I don't do that. I do read them out loud for readability, but I'm not striving for that musicality. It's not like writing poetry. It truly is just, I've got a lot more room
to, and I get to describe things, which I think is always fun in a novel. I don't get to do that in a picture book.
Well, it's fun in picture books, too.
Yeah, except the description is so different because you really have to stick to action, action and dialogue as a descriptor, unless it's something very important. So I'll never get to write the redheaded girl unless the red hair is important to the story, in a picture book. So.
So what does the time frame between story seeds and conception look like in terms of from story seed all the way through to publication?
The time frame? Well, story seeds, wow, that it could be years,
You said Family Romanov was 5 years?
Yeah, and I had this great idea. And they always, books always change. So what you think you have this great idea. And here it is, I'm talking about a piece of nonfiction now, YA nonfiction, it's 300 pages, a lot of research. But what I've discovered with nonfiction is that the story, I never really know how to tell that story. Okay, so I'll say to my editor, I'm going to write a book about Anastasia Romanoff, which is what I said about the Romanovs, because every time I went to middle school and I would talk about biography and writing biography, and I would ask them at the end, who are you curious enough that you would want to spend some time learning, discovering their lives? And every single time the girls would raise their hand and they would say Anastasia. And I thought, it's time for an Anastasia book for them. Let me answer those questions for them. So I said to my editor, I'm going to write a book about Anastasia. And she said, great, go for that, great. Well, I quickly discovered in my research that Anastasia, as much as we are fascinated with her, is in and of herself not that fascinating. She wasn't beautiful, she wasn't that talented, she didn't have a lot of interests, and let's face it, she was not the engine of her own destiny. I mean, she had to do what she was told. So I quickly put that aside, and I thought, fine, I will do all of the girls and Alexei, I will do all of them together, and they all had the same problem. They're not particularly interesting because they have a lot of interesting hobbies, and again, when they're not the engine of their own destinies, this is a problem. So I added in their parents, and then I had Alex and Nikki. I know they're my friends now, Nicholas and Alexandra, and. Then I had more of a juicy story, and that was the story I thought I was telling until I went to Russia, and I went to the Alexander Palace outside of St. Petersburg, where they went to escape, and they lived in this imperial palace away from everyone. This is what they wanted to do. And all the primary source material I had read made it sound like they were in the middle of this 1,000-acre imperial park, and they didn't see anyone. When I get there, I realized that the Alexander Palace that they've chosen to live in is right up against the gate. And right on the other side of this fence are their people. And so every day they could hear them, see them, smell their cooking, hear their babies crying. And even though they wanted to be isolated, they could see them every day. And I was sort of shocked by that. It was like, I don't understand. So it's not a physical isolation. This is a psychological isolation. And all of a sudden, I realized that this story was much bigger than Anastasia, and it was much bigger than the Romanov family. It really was a story that could not be told unless I included those voices of peasants, soldiers, workers, because they really had a big effect on the destiny of the Romanovs. But I would not have known that unless I'd done the research. So it really is like a process. Every book sort of has its own process, but nonfiction has this own unique process that I never quite know where it's going to leave me or what the book is going to look like when I'm done. But I would say that the same thing about picture books. I start out writing a story about a skunk, and I end up writing a story about a race car driver. I mean, it just is, right?
So growing up in Illinois, and were you born in Indiana?
Indiana, Michigan City, northern Indiana, right on the lake.
We were born in the same place.
Michigan City, too?
I grew up in Indiana, and being born in Indiana and having your formative years in Illinois, did you kind of feel like you were following Lincoln around for years before you ended up
I did.
writing
I
about him?
didn't have much connection to Lincoln, Indiana-wise, but once I got to Illinois, I did, because I grew up in Charleston, Illinois, which is central Illinois. That is the land of Lincoln.
Right.
And Charleston, but you've been to the land of Lincoln. We mark everything. Lincoln did, it's like Lincoln dug a well here. Lincoln surveyed the square here. Lincoln, spat on the ground here. And we mark it all. So in Charleston, Illinois, it was, everywhere I went was Abraham Lincoln. So there was the Lincoln Log Cabin, know if I should tell you this story. And that was before the state was giving it any love. So the Lincoln Log Cabin, Charleston is where Lincoln's parents, Tom and Sarah, settled when they moved to, well, finally settled when they moved to Illinois. And Lincoln was only with them a brief time. He helped to build the cabin, and then he went off to New Salem. But the cabin is there, and it's right outside of town. And so as kids, we would ride along those country roads, and we'd go out to the Lincoln Log Cabin to play as if it was our own private playhouse. And I don't quite understand who opened the doors at the time and who didn't. Sometimes the cabin would be unlocked, and sometimes it wouldn't. And if it was unlocked, we would play, and there would be no one there. It wasn't like there was any state rangers or, you know, who knows who was taking care of it then. And so we would play in there, and we'd climb upstairs into the loft, and we'd play house in there. One time we actually tried to start a fire in the fireplace, and all I can think of now is, good heavens, thank goodness we weren't able to do that. But you know, think about this. You're playing in the Lincoln cabin, and then we drive past the cemetery where Tom and Sarah are both buried. We had our county fair is at the site of one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. My friend Emily lived in a house that Lincoln stayed in when he came down to the debates, and her bedroom was supposedly the very bedroom that he slept in. So we used to try to call him, you know, with our Ouija boards. It's the 70s. So he really became this guy. He was like a neighbor. He was this guy I ran into and bumped into all the time. So when I finally decided to write about him, I thought, that's the Lincoln I want readers to know about. My friend and neighbor, Abraham Lincoln, not this guy on a pedestal, because I'd never thought of him that way. You know, there was a guy that opened up his house for me and let me try to build fires in it. So,
and that's why the scrapbook format is so successful.
Oh, I'm glad you think it's successful.
It's really
yeah,
lovely.
It feels close anyway. Yeah,
it really does. Yeah,
yeah.
It's a beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
So you have 3 to 4 books coming out next year?
I have. What do I have? I have 4 books next year. Isn't that insane? It just happens to be that they all landed at the same time.
Can we get a sneak peek at all?
Sure. If I had brought my bag over, I actually have one because I brought it to show the kids. But I have a picture book. So talk about all my different genres, right? So I have a picture book that Gerard Dubois did the illustrations for, called Joey Cornell's the Amazing Collection of Joey Cornell, which is a picture book about Joseph Cornell, the artist, and how as a child he collected items that later you'll discover in his later work, but it starts in his childhood. And the second book I have is called Strongheart, Wonder Dog of the Silver Screen, and it's based on a true story about the first great silver screen star dog. Before Rin Tin Tin, there was this dog called Strongheart, who was the #1 box office draw in the early, from like 1921 to 1927. He made more money than any other dog or any other actor in Hollywood. And he has this amazing arc of a story. He's a police dog that is snatched from puppyhood, turned into this cruel police dog. A director named Larry Trimble, real director, gets this crazy idea to have a film star dog, goes in search of the best dog, goes around the world, stumbles across Etzel, it's his name, and brings him home and rehabilitates him into this loving dog, except one problem: the dog is still a police dog. So if he suspects that you're pickpocketing or you're some nefarious person, he still will go after you. And so, incredibly and true, he's accused of this dog. He's at the height of his career, and he's accused of eating a little girl, which sounds ridiculous now, but the courts actually sort of believed it. And it turns out he goes to court. And it turns out that they let him testify. Why? Because he's used to communicating with millions of people silently through his gestures and motions. I know, it's so crazy.
What did his testimony look like?
I can't only imagine, but like a silent film. So, of course, it all turns out to be a fraud. The little girl was never hurt or gone or, you know, anything. But it turned out to be a great book. And it's got 72 paintings in it by Eric Roman. So it's a truly gorgeous book. And then I have a YA. I know, one of every genre.
Yep.
A picture book, a middle grade. And then I have a YA called Fatal Throne, and I'm really excited about this one. It's about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, this historical fiction.
Fun.
A story I love from history,
Yes.
but was too much work, right? I didn't want to do all that research, all that work. And then I thought to myself, I have friends, writers, who have always wanted to work with, and we oftentimes say we should collaborate. And I thought this is the best collaborative project. So I asked 5 other women to be Henry VIII, or Henry VIII's wives, and then I asked one person to be Henry VIII. So it's me and Prins honor-winning Stephanie Hamphill, and Lisa Sandell, who's an amazing historical fiction writer and an editor at Scholastic, and the incredible Jennifer Donnelly, who's won like a National Book Awards, whatever, and Linda Sue Park, right, and Deborah Hopkinson, and Henry VIII is M.T. Anderson.
Oh, wow.
And it was a really fun project, but it's turned out to be a really great, great book. Here's what happened. I asked my friends what wife they felt, I wanted them to have the wife they felt closest to, because I kind of like them all. And there's only one wife that I didn't feel particularly close to, which was Catherine of Aragon. And that's the one that they left me. So I feel very close to Catherine now. It was good. And, it worked out really great. And it is not a series of short stories, but it's truly a novel. And Tobin Anderson, he steps in. So I will tell my story, Catherine of Aragon, and I'll tell you basically how terrible he treats me, right? Because he did. And then Tobin steps in as Henry VIII and writes in first person about how I'm completely crazy and how it didn't happen. And in the process of his telling the story, readers discover how truthful I actually am, and what a terrible person Henry is. And that's how it goes through the whole book. So it came out really great, and it's a beautiful book too. The cover's spectacular. So
that sounds wonderful.
yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
So you mentioned Eric Roman.
Yes.
And he's your husband?
He is my husband. Yes.
Caldecott Medal winner.
Caldecott medalist. Yep.
You have some picture books that you've written with
We
him
do.
in conjunction, including Giant Squid.
Right.
Does that conceptualization process look different working with an illustrator in your own home?
I have to say it isn't a whole lot. I still write my book first without a whole lot of consultation to him. This is what I'm writing, and then I'll hand it to him, and he'll do the illustrations. When he's finished with his work, that's when we become far more collaborative. So we'll look at how the book now looks together, words and pictures, and he will oftentimes ask me to trim back words. In the case of Giant Squid, this was one where this was his project. He was writing a book about giant squid, and he storyboarded out, so all the pictures were there, but he didn't like what he'd written. So he came to me and he said, can you write me a better text than what I've created? And I said, yeah, I'd love to try that. But here I already had finished pictures. And then so that really suggested the language to me, because the tentacles and the arms are just so writhing and beautiful and dark. And that really suggested how that story should be written. But it was sort of a heady experience, because typically I hand over a picture, book, manuscript, and the illustrator does the pictures, and I don't get a whole lot of say in what's illustrated. And in this case, here are these pictures, and I'm writing text to the pictures, but it was so great because I would go back and I'd say, you know what, I can't have this picture, or can you move this picture here, or can we take this picture entirely out, or can you draw me a picture of? And I think that's the only time that will ever happen, so it's sort of fun.
This one is very special. I love that you have all of this language and descriptive language right before the title page.
Isn't that so cool? And we did that intentionally. There's a perfect example of collaboration. So we have the words and the pictures, so we have it all laid out at home. And Eric doesn't do digital art, so this is truly oil paintings, right? This big. And our editor came to visit us from New York, and we sat in the studio, and Eric moved the pictures by spread, and I read the story, the text to him. And I said to our editor, Neil Porter, I said, I don't use the word giant squid until I think I'm 8 pages in before I actually identify what it is that I'm describing.
Right.
And I said, it seems sort of ridiculous to have a title page that says giant squid when I don't use it. Additionally, Eric and I were really, really trying to have our readers feel from the very first page that they were down immersed in the deep ocean with that giant squid. And we were kind of going for that cinematic feel. So if you put a cluttered title page, if you turn the page and you had this clutter of title page with a dedication and copyright information, that just pulled the reader right out of the story. And I would say we're really lucky to have an editor like Neil Porter, who is willing to take, a lot of chances. Not many people put the title page, bury the title page within the story. He was willing to do it, just like he was willing to do the gatefold, that big pull-out squid. If you're talking about a big creature, you need a big page.
Right.
And so, that was something he allowed us to do.
It really works. It's very singular.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Like what I noticed first about giant squid.
It is singular. Yeah.
It is, yes. So aside from working together on Giant Squid, you've done many other books together. Do you find yourselves really influencing each other at all when you're working together, or is it more of just like this, I'm handing you a manuscript and you're giving me illustrations?
I would say we're always influential, even when I'm working on a project that I know he's not going to have any part in. Like right now, I've just started a new YA biography, and it's about Charles Lindbergh. And I know that he'll have absolutely no part of that at all, except he does. So he'll go with me on my research trips. He'll listen to me talk about it. He'll read the manuscript. He's always my first eyes. So in that way, he's always really influential. Or I'll have an idea for a picture book. I think I have this great idea for a picture book. And we'll take the dog for a walk, and we'll talk about what it is I'm working on. He'll talk about what it is he's working on, and we stick our 2 cents in. And I think both of us trust each other, the other person's story sense. I truly value what he brings to books and what his knowledge of children's books. And so really, I'm unbelievably lucky to have this great talent in my house that can help me, hone my ideas before I get them started, and then after they're written, help them make them better. So he is influential pretty much on everything I do.
That's so nice.
Yeah, it is. And we don't even fight. Much.
All right, so now I wanted to ask you some fun questions.
Okay.
If you had to pick one favorite author, who would it be?
I should say Eric Roman, right? But he knows that he would be my favorite. But one favorite would be William Steig. Seriously, I love William Steig. I love his use of language. I love his sense of humor. I love the picture books. I love the novels. I love the stuff he did for adults. But my favorite William Steig is a little book called Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. And why do we love it? It should not work. This is why I think I love it best, is because it does everything as a writer you're told not to do, and it's still brilliant. So think about it. You have a main character who's turned into a rock on Strawberry Hill on page, 5, 7? Almost immediately in the story. And that's where he is. The entire
whole struggle
story is he's this rock on Strawberry Hill, and you think,
Right.
I should not care about a boulder. But I completely do. And then it has this unbelievably heartwarming, beautiful end that always brings tears to my eyes, and I'm like, oh, it's the perfect book, I think.
It's lovely.
It
It's
is
so fun
lovely.
to share with children.
Yeah, do they still like it? It's longish, and what we're saying is the picture book needs to get shorter, and I'm thinking, no, it doesn't. Not if it's a story like Sylvester.
Not if it's a story that children need to hear.
That's right.
I think
That's
Sylvester
right.
is still one of those. Do you think that's your favorite book of all time?
I think it might be my favorite book. I have a lot of books that I love, and that could change like in 5 minutes because I read a lot. But that might be my favorite book of all time. It's one of those that I have on my shelf. I have a new copy, and I have one that I have had since I was a kid. And it's one of those that when I'm stuck on a picture book, right, when I'm all muddled up, which often happens, I will go and look at that book. And first of all, I'll never be able to write a book like Sylvester. But second of all, it's one of those where you go, this is sort of what I'm striving for. This is the high water mark for me. And I'll go back and go, this is a reminder. Okay, let's go back to it. Thank you, Mr. Steig. So.
All right. Do you have a book that you haven't read that you're embarrassed that you haven't read?
That I'm embarrassed that I haven't read. That's a tough question. I'm trying to think. When people talk about books that I go, oh, I haven't read it. Oh, there's a lot of children's classics that I haven't read, like The Westing Game. I'm almost a little embarrassed that I haven't read that one because people go, oh, it's the best piece of children's literature. They often will say that, and I go, I haven't read it, and I'm not really interested. I haven't read the third in the Pullman series. I read The Golden Compass, The Subtle. I didn't read The Amber Spyglass, and I always feel sort of bad about that, especially now since I'm waiting for the new
Right.
Book of Dust, and we went and actually visited Philip. Because Eric did the covers of those books, which is equally embarrassing. You should have read them all, and. I thought, oh, please, let's not talk about The Amber Spyglass because I haven't read it. So, yeah, I guess there are books that I get embarrassed I haven't read.
And I have one final question for you. Do you have hobbies outside of working on books for children?
I have a lot of hobbies. I read a lot, and not just children's books. I read a lot of adult stuff. I'm a pretty eclectic reader. But we are big hikers, big walkers. I have a dog, a big old dog. I tell kids, his name is Oxford, but he's a loving dog, but he's also unbelievably naughty. So we call him Obnoxford. And he's kind of a hobby. But we do travel a lot, and we travel to some pretty far-flung places. Like we've been to Borneo to stay with the Ibn tribe, the former headhunters. Yes, we stayed in a longhouse. I know. And in January, we're off to Africa. So we're going to go to Kenya and Tanzania, Ethiopia. So, yeah. So we do go some interesting places. We're big travelers.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much
for
for
thank
being
you. This was so
here.
much fun. Thanks, Casey.
I really enjoyed talking to you today.
I enjoyed talking with you.
I hope you've enjoyed your stay in Iowa City, too.
I love Iowa City. So
Me too.